Thanks for joining the session today. We're going to be talking about mobile threat defense. A lot of this is going to stem from the mobile device management, modern device management suite. So if you're not taking advantage of Neurons for MDM, come talk to us afterwards. We'll fix that. Okay. Quick introductions, Mike.
Yeah, I'm Mike Vasquez, Director of Services. I started with a mobile iron and moved to Ivanti back in 2011. Been touching a lot of the mobile products for a long time.
And my name's Alex. I came my very first day to Mobile Iron in 2015 and worked for Mr. Mike. So I did the implementations for Core to Cloud, also mobile threat defense, Ivanti access, and pretty much all of the MDM suite products that we offer. Let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to be talking about today is the mobile threat landscape. We're going to go in through some metrics, details, and then we're going to talk about vulnerabilities. What are you actually looking for? What are you trying to inform yourself on, et cetera? And then we're going to talk about how we help you mitigate that. All right.
So obviously, attacks against devices are getting more sophisticated. They're happening more often. And there are more mobile devices now than there are computers. And hackers know that, and that's what they're going after. That is their entry point in a lot of attacks now. So how many of you have any kind of security on your mobile devices? All right, you all showed up and you actually do. Most cases, most customers and people don't. Even on a personal side, they're not putting things on their mobile devices. They're making the assumption their mobile device is secure because Apple said it was, or Google said it was. Now, we also know PCs. That's a long time thing of everybody's had antivirus on there. Everybody knows how to protect themselves or install something that helps them mitigate risk. The mobile devices, that is still an uphill battle of customers and people not really understanding that those are things that they need. So you can see just by some of the numbers here, these are the number of CVEs that were published last year, just around iOS devices and Android devices. These are pretty staggering numbers to think about. These are all the CVEs and things that were published that they were patching against. Now they're actively going out and looking to find these things and patch them. So that is a really important thing to note, that they're actively looking for it and trying to be proactive about their security. But it's still a large number. And if you think that with this many CVEs, you're not vulnerable at some point in time, that you really do need some kind of protection there.
I think from this page, the biggest takeaway, at least for me, is 33.7 million mobile attacks last year alone. So
one other little piece of information there, on Windows 11, there was 14 CVEs last year that they published. So that just gives you some contrast of what they're trying to do as companies to protect themselves and the products that they produce.
That was a good one. So when we go back to 2019, and I'm taking you back a couple of years right before the pandemic, and you can start to think about the level that this has grown since the pandemic. Okay, so pre-pandemic, phishing attacks were detected at 431 million attacks. We're going to talk more about that number in a minute, so hold on to that. When we look at device risks, very little of that is coming from misconfiguration or some sort of device MDM-driven configuration set. Sure, some of that's coming from your operating system being out to date, so you have vulnerable OS, but really we want to talk to you largely today about the largest attack surface, which is growing, which is phishing. But before we go there, I want to talk about some regulatory requirements. So CMMC and NIST have both called out MTD as requirements in 2024, as well as the mobile app vetting. So it's really important to understand that even regulators are starting to slow down, catch wind of this, and note that MTD and mobile app vetting, which is this MAV, all of that is starting to come in 2024. So some of the common challenges that people are facing is just a lack of visibility. I have no way to see what's happening on these devices. I also don't know which threats are dangerous, which ones are weaponized, which ones are actively attacking my devices. I also don't know, once I have that, how do I remediate that? Then an additional challenge is, am I meeting the compliance requirements with HIPAA, CGIS, and others? And then the reliance on end users to set this up, right? Everyone's got to turn on a MTD app, activate it, and so on. We're going to show you how you don't have to do all of that with our MTD product. So let's go ahead and dive into the vulnerabilities. This is what we're protecting against. And we're going to dive into each of these segments today and talk about what it is that we're out to protect. The first thing to know, which is what I had just alluded to before, is for any device that's currently enrolled in the Neurons for MDM platform, you have this 100% activation for devices that are properly enrolled and set up with that Ivanti Go application.
So really, when we talk about the app has already been deployed, you've registered, all we're really doing is activating that and sending down a key to the client itself, and it turns on automatically. And this is something as an administrator, it's easy to set up. You put somebody into a group and it goes. You don't have to worry about the end user doing anything. As long as that client is active and running, you're good. We do run into scenarios occasionally where customers never use the client. They've deleted it, any number of things. That's when you have to go back, reconnect, get that client back up and running. So out of all the deployments we've ever done, that's a very small percentage of end users that really have run into that issue.
So let's go ahead and dive into phishing. We really dedicated a large percentage, and you'll see why in a minute, of this presentation time to phishing attacks. So when we dive into that, we're really talking about more than just email. Traditionally, you've seen phishing attacks as my user received an email with a malicious link. They click on that. The device is now compromised and data is compromised and so on. But it's so much more than just that. So we talked earlier about a pretty large number, 431 million, if you guys remember that number. The statistics that have come back from both Lookout and Imperium reports both show that since 2011, we're at an 85% growth year over year on this phishing. So if you start to multiply that since 2019, we are now in 2024. You can go ahead and say 5 times that. It's a very, very compelling stuff when you start to look at how important it is to protect against phishing. Hence why we have so much time dedicated to that in this presentation. So as I started to say, it's not just text messages. It's not just emails. It's coming from everywhere. It's coming from WhatsApp, Snapchat, the swipe up, the reels, the stories. It's coming from TikTok. It's coming from Facebook ads. I'm sure all of you have been tagged in a tragic crash that just won't stop appearing on your devices. Don't click that link. And then we also have a large percentage of it coming from games. Odds are every single one of you in here, raise your hand if you have one of these apps on your phone. It's okay. We all have them. It's just about using it in a way that makes sense, right? So obviously, as security professionals, we understand not to go in there and click on these links. But are our users informed? Do our users really understand all of this? Do I have visibility into this as an IT administrator and an analyst? So we have several options that you can use for anti-phishing. One of those is using the device-wide VPN. So that is if you look at this blacklist piece, that is in the cloud and an on-device remediation repository that updates every 8 hours.
Yeah. So the locker goes out, and every time the client checks back in, it's pulling down an updated list of the sites that are potentially malicious that you would be going to. It keeps updating. When we talk about the VPN, that is real-time connections going back to a data center to pull down real-time information to be able to block those devices up against a phishing attack. So it really depends on the organizational needs. Sometimes what we run into is with VPNs, You might be running a VPN already on your device, and it interferes with getting back to the data center because it tries to start a second VPN, which might be the compelling reason to use the on-device lookups for the information in that locker. Versus if you really need to have real-time data and you're really concerned about security, the VPN becomes a better choice. But we have to balance out what works for customers and their own individual needs of which choice makes sense for them.
Some of that might come down to implementations of Ivanti Access. Maybe you're using a ZTNA or a CASB of some kind. So there's lots of technical reasons why you might take one approach over another. So if you have more questions about that, feel free to come talk to us at the end and we'll help you figure out which approach would be right for you. So we've got a cloud configuration in the Neurons for MDM platform where you just plug in that anti-phishing config and you have options to go ahead and turn that on if you want to do the VPN analysis or if you want to just look at the URLs themselves.
Yep. It's easy to turn on. Obviously, it's just flipping a switch here, and that is part of your config that gets pushed. So when those devices get activated, it's pushing that config down. If you need to update it, just like anything else, it'll look for an update, and when it checks in, it'll get that.
That's super straightforward. And then we also have the tiered compliance. So some of you may have stopped by the booth over there at Demo Booth 3. I'm back in the back far left talking MTD and patch. This is custom policies. This is probably my favorite feature in the product because it was built by you guys. It was built by our customers. And it has grown and adopt lots of different types of, I mean, if you look here, we're only in the A's. There's so many things you can build compliance policies on. And one of those is the anti-phishing status. So you're able to build a custom policy to be able to help remediate and take action on that device. So this is what it looks like from a device perspective, from an end user. So this user is going to open up their email. Again, we talked about them coming from lots of different locations. It's very hard on mobile devices to validate this link. On Windows, I can click and hover over that and I get a URL readout. But in mobile, you don't get that. So when that user clicks on that link, we can see that that URL is not Google Drive, it's not Google Docs, not Google anything. And then we immediately pick up on that and we block it. So that's a part of what we were talking about with the anti-phishing. This is what the user sees. It's very seamless. It just works. A couple of things we want to point out is that this is the on-device detection with that local container or using device-wide VPN. That does not change. The user experience is still the same.
Yes. So the VPN would kick in during that process of going to that site. The end user experience doesn't really change. And that's what you're seeing here is the end user experience. Going back to reporting and some of the compliance rules, you can build all kinds of different compliance rules. That is all customization. Is that something we want to send a message to the end user? Or is that something we want to actually, prevent them from doing something? You could get very deep into the weeds of what your actions are from a compliance standpoint and what your concerns and risks might be. Most people tend to keep it fairly simple, though, for their end users.
So now we're going to talk about our unique approach and what it would look like to deploy this.
So when we really look at this, this is a deployment approach of we want to get things turned on, get it activated. Start pulling in information before we try and force an action or remediation. We need the data to come in to understand what our risks are, and then how do we mitigate that risk and fix the devices. So whether it's phishing or some other attack, we need to identify what's potentially happening first before we automatically jump ahead and say, we're just going to start blocking connections and we're going to sinkhole devices and we're going to really impede the end user's experience. And because we're going to arbitrarily say anything that has ever touched this device is completely at risk and we need to wipe it out and start from scratch. You don't even know what your risks are. So we always start with that process of let's detect, let's figure out what's going on. From once we understand what is happening in the organization and what these devices are doing and the risks, then we can work into automated responses as well as what our tiered compliance responses might be. And we're going to talk more about the on-device responses and the actions that we can take on the device that never even goes back to the console looking for actions to take or what we might apply from a tiered compliance point of view.
So as we look to those actions, we're going to remediate them using the MDM console. So you're able to build these configurations upon those local actions. But before we get to that point and before we get to tiered compliance, the users have to first activate it. So actually, before I get to that point, on the left-hand side, that shield is what it looks like inside of the Ivanti Go app. You'll see that the initial device status is always there when a device is MDM enrolled. That's how you can tell that it's completed its registration. If the devices have properly completed their registration, as some of you as MDM administrators may know, that doesn't always happen that way. So we want to make sure that those devices are healthy. Once we do that, rolling this out has really no impact to your user base until they start to hit those compliance policies that then give them those local action remediation. So, did you want me to cover this one? Bad. So there's two ways to remediate when it comes to this, and I'm going to show you the difference here. On the left-hand side, the time to detect and remediate is different because they have to call home. That device and that client has to call home and say, hey, I found this risk. What is the policy for this risk? Send down the remediation for this risk. There's a lot of, I have to go up, call home, and then send down the response. What we're doing is on-device detection. The scans and everything is built into that MDM client and activated, and it is intelligent enough to know that I know what my programming is, and I'm going to go ahead and remediate that threat.
Yeah, and so when we really look at this, what we're seeing is something's happening here on the device. We know it's coming. The device knows that there is some kind of violation. Something has happened that it's detected, but it doesn't know how to remediate that. And what we're really then starting to do with the MDM pieces is allow the MDM to do the remediation on device in real time, as opposed to going back to a console where it then sends down a message to tell the device what to do. Hopefully that makes sense, right? We're always detecting on the device, but what happens after you detect it? What do? That's where the MDM piece and the integration between MTD and the MDM really work well together. So from a local action standpoint, these are just sort of the basic lists. Now, depending on what threat is detected, you might want to choose different actions. Notifications are always the thing you want to push out there. That's notifying the end user that there was a risk. When we talk about something like a local action here where you see a network sinkhole, we don't want to sinkhole a device if it picked up a malicious app or something else. Well, that makes more sense to do when it's on an unsecure Wi-Fi network or there's a man-in-the-middle attack on the device itself. That makes sense to disconnect it from that wireless network that it's on and protect the device. So we do have to think about what do these actions do and what makes sense to apply to an end user and provide them the right notification. That notification is going to pop up on the device. So even if there was a man-in-the-middle attack happening, we sinkhole the device, they're going to get the pop-up notification letting them know they were disconnected from that network because of the attack. If you don't notify the end user, obviously they're going to be like, oh, I need to jump back onto that fake Starbucks network and see what else I can get stolen from me.
So we've dove into phishing quite a bit, and then we talked about our approach to things. Now we're really going to talk about the other network attack vectors, app attacks, or malicious apps, and device-based threats. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So sometimes people just aren't aware of what kinds of attacks are out there, and this one's pretty scary. So check brain, stage fright, this was the Bezos attack. You put this device on your end table and you go to bed. We all do it every night. That device is there, and an attacker has sent an MMS to that dormant device. Once that MMS gets processed, we then see that the exploit gets executed. From there, there's a privilege escalation that occurs on that device. that then leaves that to be a compromised device. And this is persistent. So this attacker is able to do this again and again and again. Where we come in is the ability to detect that. There's no way you know that's happening if you don't have mobile threat defense. So again, Pegasus, Stage Fright, Bezos, and Checkbrain are the ones that we see this type of attack.
Yeah, depending on what the attack is, we may not be able to stop it, but we can identify it at minimum. Some things we might be able to do of, let's say it was happening on the device and we did want to sinkhole it. Maybe it is going to disconnect it from the Wi-Fi network, removing that attack. There's any number of things that, think of all of us here at a hotel. How many of you connected to the Wi-Fi network on your devices? You go to sleep tonight and it's still on that Wi-Fi network, this could be happening, which might make sense why you might want to sinkhole the device on this particular type of attack. Automatically disconnects it and your Wi-Fi, you're no longer on Wi-Fi and it's only cellular. The attack was coming from the Wi-Fi network. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of why the automated actions make sense, but also how these attacks could be coming. It could be a message being sent. It could be the Wi-Fi network we're on. There's any number of things that could be happening. There's a lot of attacks happening, and they are going through cell carriers too.
So a part of our unique approach, again, we're going to dive into this. We're just going to have different information this time. Along the top here, we're going to talk about man in the middle as a network attack. This is all of those threat vectors just written out. So down in here, I have a couple of different things about this, but the most important one is this man in the middle attack. So if I have my device and I think I'm connecting to Starbucks Wi-Fi, and we'll use that example. There's actually a Panda and Mike's device over there on the other side of the Starbucks, and I think it's there, but this is a spoof. So I've connected, I've logged into my bank, I've logged into my email, I'm on Teams, I'm doing all the things. And now I'm officially compromised. Well, he can block my device's ability to perform the mobile threat defense remediation because he's able to block that traffic going back to the cloud because it's his network. He can block what he wants, right? What we're doing is we're able to bring that to the Ivanti Go client. We're able to bring that to the app itself. So where we almost look at it this way as a competing solution might be an independent MTD offering. Ours is the SDK baked right into the app. That's that 100% activation component. So in this case, it cannot be removed or disabled by a user because it's baked into that MDM agent. And then we also have...
And you also set your policies in there to make sure they get disconnected from things when they remove that client, right?
Yeah.
Because all good admins wanted to make sure their end users aren't removing the mobile iron client that's providing security, and it's doing jailbreak detection as well as this.
Yeah. It's really reporting to cloud servers, not susceptible to man in the middle, susceptible to man in the middle. So a lot of times mobile threat defense providers will present that to you and tell you that they have all of this built in, but they're man in the middle susceptible. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into the device side threats. We're not going to spend a bunch of time on this. You guys know this stuff. The obvious out of date OS, we saw 52% of the attacks come across that Kaspersky report as really the primary configuration based attack that we see. Suspicious profiles. So that's pretty straightforward for MDM administrators. Vulnerable apps, side-loaded apps, malicious apps. The malicious privilege escalation that you saw on that Bezos Pegasus network attack, as well as USB debugging on Androids. These are the primary device threats. Again, we detect them. And when we deploy MTD, we're really sitting back and watching this stuff come across. And when we see it, then we have the option to decide where it is in the prioritization. Is this something that we need to hit very hard with a full lockdown, or is this something that we're just going to notify the user? How are we going to handle that? Are we going to quarantine all the applications, or are we just going to send them an email?
And again, we can talk about tiered compliance with some of these things. Maybe it's notifications. And if it's persisting, hour after hour, we start putting actions in behind that. It all depends on what your risk tolerance is within your organization.
Yeah. So that's all built upon that custom policies. I know some of you I had worked with at the pod. If you have more interest to see how we do that, definitely stop by. So let's talk about malicious apps. Um, the way that attackers are attacking apps is evolving and changing. So what you're going to see here is Chromium. Chromium is the base operating system that all of these browsers run on. So there's a clear shift in how attackers are attacking mobile by going to the operating system of the app that all of these are built upon, so that all of these browsers then become susceptible because this was a Chromium vulnerability.
This ties back to potentially your own internal developers leveraging Chromium. If they've leveraged Chromium to build your own internal apps off of, that's what they're going to be targeting here. And so it expands not just past the basic apps here that you see, but a lot of times organizations, their own internal development gets impacted by stuff like this. Because it's
You'll
really the framework that we're talking about.
Yeah, and then I think we also talked, I don't think the slide's in here, but the .NET framework for Android as well. So there's tons of .NET Android apps out there, and there are clear vulnerabilities with that as well. And you look at the numbers of apps affected, and you'll see hundreds of thousands of installations that are current. So these are out there on these devices, likely on your users' devices. We just want to know that they're there so we can mitigate the risk. So, if we want to dive into app analytics a step further, we're really trying to break this down into two pillars: privacy and security. From a privacy perspective, we're looking at app scoring, risk rating, things of that nature, as well as from the security side, domain, certificate, network connections, all of those lovely things. Once we do that, we're able to then create a policy that locates that and give you reporting on that you can report up that says, hey, I've located this with a privacy or security violation. Here's the report. Here's the CVE about that app, and so on. Did you want to talk about the
Yeah.
analysis?
So, as we go through analyzing these things, we've all gotten more accustomed to having the privacy conversation over the last few years. A lot of laws have changed. It's a normal conversation. We know how to handle that. What we're starting to see more of is it's more about the security risks on those apps that people are putting on there. We've already had the conversations around how do we deal with privacy, and there's things that have changed, but the security itself, that hasn't changed. That it needs to keep evolving and changing. We haven't matured enough in that, but at the same time, the risks keep changing and evolving and growing. So we need to keep on top of those security risks and become, we get these reports. What happens? What are we going to do with these high risk apps on there? Do we need to notify the end user to remove it? What is our internal policies? And this becomes more of a bigger discussion of what are our corporate policies, particularly if it's a BYOD device as opposed to a corporate device. How are we going to tell them that their app that they're leveraging is risky? What is our risk tolerance, again, for those things? If it's something that's widely spread and easy to manipulate and gain access to your device, yeah, we might want to say, hey, you have a big risk here, and it might lead to a bigger exploit. When you get to that bigger exploit, we're going to remove your device from everything, and you can't have any corporate data on that, and you can't connect to anything. So it all depends on what happens. These apps are your gateway into the device to then get into elevated privileges and really have full control.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I'd add is when you create these reports, it will give you the score of that app on the privacy score and the security score independently. So I think that part's really neat. So this is just going into what those reports are.
Yeah. And you can see, you might see things that are legitimate business like this. Yeah, it might have some risk to it, but we're willing to accept that risk as opposed to, it's going to give you low risk or medium risk around the privacy. But again, those are acceptable risks. We know what our risk tolerance is. And it's how do we define those things? And each organization is going to be different about how they define that.
So, what does it look like on your users' devices? These are iOS and Android screenshots. Here, when a malicious application is detected, we're showing them towel root, app X, tap, or test app, mobile scanner, whatever that is, with a quick uninstall button. The user knows exactly what's going on. If they connect, they're going to get a notice. Hey, there's that Starbucks Wi Fi. So we have a risky Wi Fi. Your data can be stolen and it's at risk. So we're giving them informative notifications, right? And we're letting them know exactly what's wrong. That's baked in.
So they do get the pop-up notification, everything else. So they do see it.
They do get
and
the
then
banner.
Go into the app to identify that. So we are making it clear that it's not just they have to go into the app, but yeah, they get the pop-up and everything else.
So just like every other user that gets a pop-up of a security alert, I'm just going to swipe up and get back to what I was doing. So we end up changing from a shield that is compliant to a non-compliant shield. So in the event that a user swipes up and ignores your prompts, which happens quite a bit, you're going to have a quarantine option. That's those remediation steps. So if I try to go click on my next app for work, I'm going to go back into my Outlook. I do not care. I just came to Starbucks to check my Wi-Fi or get on the Wi-Fi and check my email. Well, I'm going to click on that email app and it's going to disappear. And if it's running in the background, it's going to shut down. So that's a part of those remediation steps that we were talking about with the tiered compliance. All right. So now we're at the MTD, MDM love slide.
Yeah. So this is really kind of giving you the information between what is MTD doing and what is the MDM portion doing. And you can really see here, they work well together. You can run them separate. You really can, but you're not going to get all the functionality, which is why it makes sense to combine these as a product and put them together, and you get the full advantages of that.
One of the conversations I'm having in the field and making that jump to sales engineering, a lot of people tell me, hey, I don't really need mobile threat defense because my MDM product is already looking for jailbroken devices. Almost like that's the only threat they're thinking about. So it's really important to just understand there is overlap, but that's not the conversation we're trying to have. The conversation we're talking about is that 431 million phishing attacks that are happening year over year growth at 85%. Those are staggering numbers. You try to do the math. Anybody got a calculator? Yeah. I mean, that's a lot. So just wanted to say thank you for coming to today's session. We appreciate your time.